Alrighty, well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, and I hope that you're having a great Tuesday. I am because I get to spend this time with you all and of my wonderful friend Leah. So I am very excited. My name is Kristen Young. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the executive director of LeaderShape. And I'm going to be a co host of our conversation here this afternoon. So, welcome everybody. A couple of just general things as we get started here. We all know I believe after 2 years, hopefully, we all know about how to use Zoom as a platform. But as we gather together this afternoon, please feel free to post your comments or questions in the chat feature, in the chat area. I'll make sure, and Leah will make sure that we are reading those as we go along the way. We will use polls during our time together just to get people's thoughts and opinions and to carry on in our conversation. And if you do have a question that you don't want to share publicly, feel free to message me privately, and I'll be happy to entertain that question or answer that question to you either privately or bring that up in our conversation. And, we'll see how time goes. We are probably maybe not going to be able to have people come on a microphone and talk with us, but if there is time and the space allows it, Leah, I think we'll be able to do that as well. So we'll just see how this goes in our time, in our hour together. As we begin this time together, I do want to put up our this land acknowledgement and really just give us an opportunity to really think about, as we begin this presentation, just think about the land that each of us is on today, and that it is the land of original homelands of Indigenous and tribal nations. And, we do acknowledge that there is a painful history of genocide and forced removal from those territories. And we honor and respect that the many diverse Indigenous peoples that are still connected to this land. And ask you to just think about where you are today. We know we are spread out around the country and potentially even around the globe, but please honor and acknowledge the Native Indigenous peoples from the land which you're joining us from, and give that thought to the ancestry and the generations that came before you, and the gift that their presence was and is to us and our ability to be here today. So for those of you joining us, a little bit about LeaderShape. If you're not familiar to us, we are a not-for-profit that works with colleges and universities on creating this vision of a just, caring, and thriving world where all lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. And we do this work because we are looking to transform the world by increasing that number of people who lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. And a lot of the work that we do is through conversations, which is why we're gathered today in this space, to really bring together people to think about what that means, think about what our leadership is, and what are some of the topics that we're really struggling with. We do this under the umbrella of our leadership definition that I have up here for you all. I'm sure your offices or places of work also have definitions of leadership. This is one that we use at LeaderShape, and it really does. I think as you engage in this conversation with Leah today, you will see that this guides a lot of the philosophy and the work that LeaderShape does, and hopefully you all can see yourselves in this definition. So without further ado, I want to introduce my dear friend, Leah Gallant. She is joining us here from MIT. Leah, do you want to introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Kristen, thank you so much for having me today, and to Vernon as well. LeaderShape has been a big part of my professional and personal life for almost the past dozen years. So I'm just thrilled to be here today and to talk about two issues that are really important, of top of mind today. So I feel like this is a little bit also, this is your life. I'm seeing some names on here. I haven't seen it forever. Maybe I'll see some X's on here. No, I'm just kidding. Seriously though. But no, honestly, I'm so thrilled to just see everyone here today. So we'll be talking about empathy and accountability in the workplace. So for the past, I want to say a little bit over 20 years, I worked in student affairs, and I worked a lot with college students, and obviously, and with student leadership and training, and then I had most recently moved in about 2 years ago into the the human resources space still in higher education. So right now, I am the talent development consultant and diversity, equity, and inclusion officer for the Alumni Association and Office of Resource Development at MIT. So that's all of our fundraisers, all the folks that work with our alumni. And so I do a lot of training and development for staff, and I absolutely love my job. And I work a lot with managers and leaders alike, and the roles that they have. And when thinking about this topic today, that's a popular one and top of mind, which I've have talked about and with managers before, is this idea about empathy and accountability. And because I'm a nerd, I journaled about this a little bit last night because I wanted to see where am I in my headspace about these two topics now. And on empathy, accountability, I never thought I could achieve both. And in fact, truth be told, as a manager, I did not, especially as a young manager, I did not do this well. It's very hard. It's challenging, but not impossible. So healthy disregard for the impossible, as LeaderShape would say. Being able to empathize to someone's situation and then turn around in the next breath and say, now get back to work, seems cold and unfeeling and discompassionate. So we need to dig deep and figure out then, how can we align ourselves with exhibiting compassionate guidance and compassionate leadership without letting others get so in their swirl of where they're at, where it'll only let them dig deeper. So we aren't the savior as managers and leaders, right? Sometimes we think we have to have all the answers and to be able to fix everything. But however, we can direct our staff, our peers to resources, remove barriers for access, connect them with someone that can talk them through next steps. Compassion is moving someone where they need to be and holding them accountable to the impact that they may have created and or are creating. So you can do both. It's being able to ask those questions we'll talk through in a bit of, what is it that you need? I'm so sorry you're going through this. Thank you for sharing this with me. I know that this has been a rough past 2 years for you. I want to make sure you're getting what you need to stay engaged. You are a supported and valued colleague here, and I want you to be successful. What barriers could I remove? What resources can I provide to put you on track? And building trust from the start with colleagues is huge. So I wanted to start off with some of those musings before we get into that, because I feel like that's where I was last night in my head. And I feel like it's been informed by a lot of things that I did and did not do well as a manager and as a leader, and what I talk about with managers today. So we can go to the next slide. So if you could put in the chat, and you may have already, I haven't checked the chat yet, what drew you here today? Thanks,
Leah,
Erin.
I'm a big fan club, Leah, by the way. There's a lot of people here that are very excited just to spend time with you.
Leah,
I'm one of them.
Leah Gallant, this is your life. But it's so great to see new friends on here. Yeah, always learn more. I always call, when I talk about empathy, I'm like, wow, is that the MVP of the last 2.5 years, right? Particularly when we're thinking about leadership and being a manager. And it's, a manager I work with said, I feel like for the past 2 years, I've had to be, an armchair therapist, right?
Right.
A little bit. And yes, and yes, and you still need to be a manager.
Right.
And so getting lost into that that savior piece. Let's remove ourselves from that
Well,
while
that's
still
great.
being able to be compassionate.
Yeah, and that's what I appreciated about the things you were sharing in your reflection from last night, is that you recognize that potentially it's not going to be your role
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
provide, to remove those barriers, right? And I think sometimes
Right.
when I think about being empathetic as a supervisor, as a manager, I often think about, what can I solve this for them? Can I really take away that hurdle or obstacle? But maybe I can't, but I can direct them in the resources that can, so I don't need to then carry that, what might seem like a burden, at an
Yeah.
additional a burden, which I think somebody mentioned here, is Nina, showing empathy in the workplace when my own well might be a little dry or empty. Like, I think that for me comes into play in both of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see some people, on here also works with students. And I think with students, you know, um, coming into a time where developing, growing, shaping their own lives and how they approach situations and how we help guide them. I will pull out an old student affairs phrase during this session. So wait for that, and how we can do that. So um, keep putting things in the chat, but we'll move on to the next question, moving right along. Yeah, so what's the most important thing we should be talking about today when you're thinking about empathy and accountability? And most important thing, and that may be different for others, but I'm seeing a lot of themes here too.
Yeah, I see a lot of themes too about people trying to balance that empathy with accountability,
Yes,
which I know we'll,
yes,
we'll talk about. But really, and recognizing how those two play hand in hand
burnout.
with each other.
Yeah, right. Servant leadership, not being taken advantage of, morale, intersectionality. Yeah. Burnout and morale is huge. In terms of, we're also in a time of having to work so differently than we've ever had to before. There may be some people on this call too, is like, I've always worked with remote, but we haven't been in a place, at least in this country, where we've all had to be kind of working and going through this. And when I say working remote, I want to be mindful of the many, many workers in our country that have not been remote from the start
Mhm.
based upon their position. So we also are in a place where, and some of you may be on this call, where you do work, for example, or on the front line or with service, working as service workers, for example. So systems lead to burnout, individual burnout, priorities. Yeah. And it's harder to communicate too virtually as opposed as in person. And maybe we weren't doing it so well in person, and now we've got to learn how to do it differently now. Trauma informed approach, yes. And man, over the past after the past 2.5 years, we as a society have experienced and gone through trauma in so many different ways and aspects, depending upon where we're coming from, right? And so burnout, yeah, how not to become a sponge. Quiet quitting. What I also heard today too is quiet firing, which is basically employers or managers in some subconscious or maybe conscious way not treating employees well, burning them out, not providing effective feedback, all of that.
Mm,
Um,
huh,
yeah, so very interesting.
that is
So
really
this
interesting.
this yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
No, I think that's really interesting, right? That it great and Catherine, you're saying it here, quit, like setting someone up for failure, like you're making it impossible for them to be successful, so then they are going to leave, right?
Yes.
And you're going to make that 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 happen for them.
Well, it's easier to do that than to have the hard conversation and delivering constructive feedback. Why don't we
Sure.
just be passive about it? And when I say that, I'm turning a mirror on myself in all the times I may have not delivered constructive feedback in the
Sure.
way that it should have been done. So
Yes, and
um,
it talks about the importance of having an environment where you can do that, where you have created the trust and the relationships to be able to have those conversations, because they're so vital to not only the personal development, but that of your team, and then that of the organization that you're working for.
Yeah, absolutely. We could go on to the next slide.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to launch
all right. On a scale of 1 to 10, how empathetic are you? And this is anonymous.
The lowest and 5 being the highest, like low empathy to high. Okay, the answers are coming in. We're at 35%, 45, 50. Oh, people are clicking away here. 56%, 70, 75, 80. Oh, we're so close. People are clicking away. Okay, I'm going to end the poll so you all can see the results.
Interesting. Nobody rated themselves a 1 or a 2, right? But there's 3s, 4. And, I think when I see this poll, I'm like, geez, is being too empathetic, when we swing that pendulum too far, do we need to be somewhere in the middle? I don't have an answer to that. Maybe at the end of today, I will.
Yeah, I think Beth mentioned that in the chat. It wasn't being too empathetic, but being too nice and being an effective manager.
Right.
And I think this is going to be the same for empathetic, right? So like you're asking it, can you be too empathetic? Is that
right? And not mixing the two.
Oh, nope. Wait.
Oh, no, that's okay, because I'm going to do a quick. Oh, no, you can go to that. But the next video we're going to show, some of you may have seen. I use this a lot when talking about and in training on empathy, building trusting relationships with managers. This is, love her. Brene Brown is Dr. Brene Brown, a leading expert on vulnerability and empathy. You may have read some of her books, seen her TED Talks. This short that we're going to see next is a animated short based on one of the TED Talks that she gave in empathy. It's just 2.5 minutes. I think it just sets the stage well. And so I'll let her do the talking. She really, so if we go play that.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Thanks, Kristen. I love that clip for so many reasons. And I've watched it so many times. And I love how she frames empathy. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm just so glad you told me. Period. Not launching into or silver lining it, which I've been guilty of before, but just, oh, I'm so glad you shared that with me. Because oftentimes when people are walking into your offices, your spaces, whatever, wherever you might gather, or they just want to be heard. And it may not be telling, maybe it's the venting or about something that just happened in a meeting or something that happened them personally. They just want to be heard. And so using that space, because, as Brene Brown said, empathy is a choice. You have to connect with something deep down inside yourself, right? To then connect with that person. And think about the last time that someone really listened to you. They really gave you airtime to get to what you needed to say, or to have said what you wanted to say, or they simply asked you, how are you really doing? Right? And so we spend our time caring so much for others or managing others that we may lose sight of the time that someone has asked us that. And so remembering that feeling the next time someone comes in and we feel that something is off, particularly as, as a manager, as a leader, or wherever that the work that we're doing, we move so quickly throughout our day that we may miss those cues. And that's where that key is, because it's a choice to be able to cue into that. And so maybe in that conversation, you don't choose that time to say, whew, I'm so sorry, now get back to work. You choose that time to listen and say, oh, I'm so glad you told me that. You let them talk. What is it that you need, right? And then you may maybe choose that the end of that meeting to then have let's talk tomorrow. Let's talk in 2 days. What can we do to support you, right? And, utilizing those compassionate questions, but still knowing with the understanding that we want you to continue to be engaged. You're a valued member of this team, or we want you to be more re-engaged, whatever needs to happen, right? Have that follow-up conversation, because often that first time somebody just wants to be heard. If you could go on to the next slide after the video.
Sure.
Kristen, because I want to talk about, and Brene touched on this, that you want to assume good intent and that people are coming from a good place, right? And, the difference between empathy and sympathy, Brene touched on this, is putting yourself into their shoes. Sympathy is understanding from your own perspective. So really pushing your own perspective aside. I always tell people, you can't have an opinion on someone else's experience. Have you ever had somebody say, well, that couldn't have happened? Oh, I've never had that happen to me. That couldn't have been the case. Just say, wow, I'm sorry, or just listen, right? You can't have an opinion on someone else's experience. So that's really key in terms of empathy. And that we, in offering that kindness, so acknowledging that the past 2 years in particular have been hard in so many ways, and that our colleagues and people we lead and manage have been through so much. The global pandemic, grief of losing loved ones, racial unrest and trauma, et cetera, et cetera. When thinking about empathy and accountability, remember you can be kind and firm, right? I had a staff member one time called it, when she was working with students, I was warm but firm. I was warm but firm. I'm like, I love that.
Right.
You
right.
know, caring for our staff and those we are responsible for is holding them accountable. Holding them accountable. It's providing constructive feedback. It is not allowing them to wallow and not get out of the cycle of their own misery. Allowing them to not come up with their own solutions and problem solve. It is not avoiding the hard conversations and providing feedback.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Leah. I think there's a couple of things that came up in the chat that I see that are resonating with folks. But there's a question here from Carrie, and a couple other people are mentioning it as well. Yeah. So how do you answer when you ask, what do you need? What if it isn't something that you could provide, right? And I think it ties into what Beth mentioned too, about sometimes what they need is, I want to go home for the rest of the day, but what if it's not an option, right? Like we've all been in those moments where you're like, something happened and it is really difficult, but yet I still need to do my job, right? And so how do we balance that? What's the answer to that?
Yeah,
so have the answer. I'm not assuming that you do, but it'd be great if you did.
Yeah, well, I think that's $1 million question too. If it's, here's the thing too, a lot of times, I'd love a promotion. I love more money. I'd love to take next week off when you're in the middle of the biggest program of the year.
Right.
And, here's where it's setting up expectations. These are some things I can do for you. We're going to need you here on campus next week. Where can we be flexible, though, of when you are on campus, for an example?
Sure.
Now, if there's a death in the family and the funeral's on Monday, no, they cannot come to campus on Monday, right? If there's a death in the family. So you'd have to figure that, but where places don't ever overpromise when you don't know. I talk to managers too. Do not promise promotions, money, bonuses, direct them to somebody in HR who can talk to them about leaves. You may want to talk to them about, how do medical or family leaves work? How do promotions work? Before making those promises. That's why I'm saying that first initial conversation, gather what you can and cannot do, right? And so if they cannot, where can you be flexible in removing a barrier and providing resources, but still having them they can't leave early today. What do you need? You need 10 minutes. Do you need 10 minutes to make a phone call, to compose yourself? Where is it that you can provide? Somebody else did put in a chat too. What if they don't have an answer to that question? That's okay.
Sure.
Because they may not in the moment, right? And that may very well be the case, but offering them, I am here to work through this with you. You may want to go home, sleep on this, or leave for 15 minutes, come back, knowing what you need. Or some people say, I just wanted to get it off my chest. Or all of these things. A lot of times, all they want is someone to listen.
That makes sense. I think I appreciate what you're saying, Leah, about not over promising something. I think oftentimes as a manager, I do think, and someone will come to me and think that I am the one who can provide that answer, right? About a leave or a promotion or financial pieces that you're like, I can't provide that answer, but let me open a door to you. Let me introduce you to somebody. If you don't know that, let me help you navigate that process, so that we can work together to get that answer. So I almost wonder sometimes if you become kind of an advocate with them, because sometimes, and I think depending on the situation, maybe they don't have the capacity to make those types of decisions yet, right? Given what they might be going through, right? And so how do you walk alongside them with that? Depending on what it is, right? I think about if it's something like a death in the family or something very, very tragic where it is all consuming at that moment, then maybe they're not in that right space of mind to be like, oh no, you should be talking to HR about your leave. Let me help you with that, right?
Yes. And that's why I said, even in the beginning, you don't need to be the savior, have the answers, any of that. You knowing the resources of where you can point them in the direction, who might be a good person to talk about that, or is X, Y, and Z. For students, for example, when working with students, we would get, I'd always talk about with my staff, if you get somebody here, in here that they're dealing with something, whoa, this is out of my scope of responsibility. We used to walk them to mental health, or we used to walk them to MIT Medical, or offer that, or, say, who's around that we can get you, who can you connect with that will walk you there later, and then connect them with their area director or somebody, in terms of if it was working with students. The same way with staff, removing the barriers, providing the resources to the best of your ability. Also not, we are very quick to fix things, or feel like in that moment we need to fix something. And oftentimes if we fix it right away without knowing what that looks like down the road, that becomes a bigger issue later on. I want to move, to the next slide, if we can, Kristen. Here's that student affairs term for all of, my higher ed friends: challenge and support. And this goes for everybody. You may recall this from grad school days. I felt like this was one of the best tools that I learned is challenging the person and supporting them at the same time. So, I challenge you to grow in this area, and I'm here to support you doing that. What barriers do I need to remove? What resources do I need to provide? What areas would you like to grow in? Here's some ways where empathy moves into accountability. I have to address how that meeting just went and how your behavior impacted others. Your behavior, not you, how, address the behavior, not the person, right? I noticed that you've been late on the last 2 deadlines. I want to be sensitive to what's on your plate here and at home. What do we need to adjust, or what do you need more of? It's not letting them off the hook. It's not letting them get away, or, it's providing some space to think through and challenge them to come to their own solutions while supporting them at the same time, right? So self-awareness is key for people to listen to their own feedback, right? But you need to also become self-aware first. So if you feel like this might be a hard space for you to get at, thinking about why is that the case? Oh geez, I don't have the time, or I got through this. I always talk about, I love throwing my husband under the bus in these workshops. I always say to Jeff, not everybody went to the Jeff Gallant School of Resiliency, because he is like, well, why couldn't they done this? Or I did through this, and he went through all this X, Y, and Z, and this was so much more than this person went through. You can't have an opinion on someone else's experience, right? Not everyone went to your school of resiliency or your school of grit or what have you. We all have come with different lived experiences, and some shared. And even if we have shared lived experiences, it's still different, right? And so, so I like to use that too.
A great thing to remind ourselves too, right, is that even if it's a shared experience, it wasn't the same experience. I will experience something different than you, even from this hour that we spend together, right? We're all here in this room together. We will experience it differently. And to remind ourselves of that when we're in a society, I think, where we are very easy to have an opinion about what should or shouldn't happen, or how it could have been, right? That we need to recognize that.
Oh, Jeff is fine. Jeff is just fine. I know. But I do like, he's a good sport. I can go to the next slide too. So this is some things I talked about, especially when I was, doing some training with managers around managing through transition. Yeah, that's absolutely right, Jen. He is very used to hearing it. And training with managers, and particularly managing through transition, and from virtual to hybrid and all of that, and leading with empathy. And I show this picture of a boat because don't assume that you know exactly what others are going through, right? We may all be in a boat, but not the same boat. Some may have been in a dinghy and some may be in a yacht. And those are, but the same storm, but
Right.
two different ways to manage it, right? And so lead with vulnerability, and also share your own, anxieties, weaknesses, background, where you feel comfortable in doing so. That's where the building trust piece is. You can say, hey, it's not a place to say, oh, I know the silver lining. I know exactly what you're going through, but geez, I'm also anxious about this time coming up too. Maybe save that for a next meeting, or, this is an area that I've always feel like I've struggled with. I became vulnerable with this group today by saying, as a manager, I stunk at holding empathy and accountability both in meetings. I got a little bit better at it. What do they say? Those that can't do, teach. But I had to grow, and I had to become more self-aware of where I did not do that well and why. My people pleasing comes in the way. And I was very open with my staff about that too. I said, I need some help on this area, right? And we were vulnerable with that. And actually that helped me be a better manager, and actually it did help me better hold them accountable too, because I had shared that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that that's really helpful too, right, Leah? Like, what do we share as managers to
Right.
create that environment, right? So that they can see us being vulnerable and recognizing, like, this is difficult for me, but yet I still want to do this. This is still the way in which I want to lead, and that I want to hold empathy and accountability together. But
Yeah.
that can be then also some collective work, because they need to do that with you as well, right? And so how do you create that that type of environment? I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And for people being like, well, I don't know, like, you can always go back and build trust or rebuild trust. You can always go back and rebuild trust. You don't have to start from scratch. You can go back and do a meeting. You can start a meeting differently the next time you bring staff together. You can do something different, and say, hey, listen, this is something I've learned about myself as a manager. We're going to do this differently moving forward, right? I would go into meetings sometimes, staff meetings, when you were in person. People hate staff meetings. And I went into one meeting and everybody looked like I had just kicked their dog. And I was like, I'm gonna leave. And I said to them, and I said, what is going on? I said,
You didn't you? Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to leave this room. And I said, I'm going to come back in, and we're all going to have a different attitude, including myself, because I came in too feeling like that. And then I came in and I was like, woo, staff meeting. It's just about a different, and then they were laughing. It's just about a change of attitude, but you can go back and do it. You can not go back, but go forward and do it differently. So, keep lines of communication open. Obviously, listen. The communication piece is often the common denominator to a lot of what's going on and what's not. What's not going right and what is going right. Avoid leading questions when asking questions. You want to do this too, don't you? Or don't you think that's a good idea? People are going to say yes.
Right.
Because it's, so acknowledge the mental and emotional impact of the past couple of years, that everyone's speed may not be your speed.
It reminds me too, when you say this with the questions and kind of avoiding those leading questions, you have to acknowledge too the role that your positional power might play in that, right? If you are their manager, right? People are like, well, I think I have to say yes, even because there's a positionality here, a power in play that maybe because it's not been a great relationship so far, I do feel that I have to agree with you and move in this direction, but I don't actually, right? And then creates that divide, maybe little by little.
Yeah, it does. And I think there's a difference between saying, we have to get, as a manager, there's a difference between saying, you want to do this, do you? And there's a difference between having to manage and lead and saying, we need to get X, Y, and Z done in the next month. All right. So I want to, hold what you just told me, or what we had talked about last week, or what's going on, barriers I can remove, resources I can provide, to where you can be the valued team member that you are in contributing to this, right?
Right.
So also, sometimes people are looking for permission. They don't know about that it's okay to start over with peers. You can apologize, right? It's okay to do that. It's okay to work a condensed work week and ask for that if it's possible, right? So is that an option? Is it an option to take a couple days? Is it an option to take a leave at some point? Though sometimes employees don't know that's an option. So they just keep getting stuck and don't allow themselves to be helped, right? And so what can we, again, what barriers can remove, what resources can we provide? How can we get the work done? And in communicating all of that in a compassionate way. Now, so I would love to know, and I don't know how you want to do this, Chris, because it's, got a little bit of less than 20 minutes left. What is it that you are most struggling with when it comes to empathy and accountability? People to come.
Yeah, so do you want me to stop the share and I could put everybody on the screen? If
Yes.
you're comfortable with that? Does that?
I would love that.
Okay.
And raising Zoom hands.
Raise your hand. Yep.
Oh, it's so great to see everybody. Hi. Being a people pleaser. Yes, that is something I have dealt with since I was very small. Yeah. Balance. Yeah. Balancing both the boundaries. The caution of using empathy as a buzzword. Oh, that's good. The caution of using empathy as a buzzword. Yeah. Hi, Kristen.
Hi, friend. How are you?
Good.
I have a question for you. So, how might you both be empathetic and accountable when it gets to working with a team member who we know has a lot of things going on in their life, but also are not meeting the basic metrics of their job, and it's getting to a point where, there are maybe some concerning HR related things that are happening. How do you do that?
That's the $1 million question, because I don't think you're alone in that. Oftentimes that's where things get to when we ask ourselves this question. Oh my gosh, what do I do now? It's gotten here. For me, speaking from an HR perspective, partner with people in HR. Lean on them to also talk you through because everyone's situation is different. What I said too, being compassionate is also giving constructive feedback. I felt like I was doing of no help when I wasn't giving constructive feedback to staff. And that I was not leading with compassion. In fact, I was keeping them in the dark of areas that they needed to grow on. What barriers can I remove? Here's where things stand in your performance. What barriers can we remove? What resources can we provide to get you where you need to be? Having the honest conversation is empathy and compassion. Oftentimes too, we have staff members that were never told. I had a couple staff members, they were never told feedback before because people avoided it. And then you inherit the staff member. And so then you've got to go back and they'll be like, wait a second, nobody's ever told me this, right? There's some people too, I remember talking to a staff member one time, they're like, oh, constructive feedback is just a buzzword for I'm fucking up. And I'm like, that is not it. We should all be receiving feedback. We all have areas of growth. If you're not getting it, that's a mistake. Yeah, I used to think call my HR rep was tattling or reporting. Yeah, no, right. The HR partner is a great coach. They really help coaching through conversations like this, because we don't want to have, it's not something we want to engage in every day, but that's why we're here, or that's why those partners are there. Hopefully you have a great HR team. And if you don't, find someone that can, that may know the situation, or that's objective or pulled out enough of your situation. They don't know the players and can coach you through that. I'll never be sick of Carrie. Aaron, hi.
Hi, long time no see. I have a quick question. So, I'm feeling like I'm in a good place in terms of my ability to find that empathy and accountability, because that took me a while to figure out how I could be that empathetic leader and not have that, that trauma-informed leader, but then not have people kind of step over that accountability and hold people accountable for showing up to class, for showing up to meetings, for showing up to work, because that sure took a little while. But I'm having difficulty with the person above me, showing that towards me and other people, and how I can communicate to them my concerns with how we're being treated in a way that is most effective. That isn't me trying to tell them how to do their job, but is most effective and safe for me. What kind of advice do you have for me that also might help others in this room when someone like myself is trying to communicate to the person above me?
Oh, that's a whole nother workshop.
That's I had to come in here and switch it up a little bit.
And of course you did. No, I mean, what you're talking about is managing up effectively in terms of communicating expectations, communicating the barriers that need to be removed for you and resources that need to be provided for you and your team, right? And to having that conversation. And see, here's where we get stuck, right? We may all do this well, but do those who above us don't, right? And this is where HR oftentimes gets stuck to, right? And having the hard conversations, in terms of, it's so hard in managing up and having those conversations. What do you need? Here's what I'm noticing. That's a whole nother workshop, Aaron, but it's like switching around the question. What barriers do need to be removed for you? What resources need to be provided for you to be successful and engaged? Here's what you love about your job. Come with solutions. Here's some things I'm really struggling with, so that's some of that insight. And I'm just noticing that self-doubt from years of abusive leaders, perhaps I'm over, but I have a lot of leadership doubt. I also know what a series, I know, right? And it's like taking that leap. And Catherine, I think just by knowing what you want to avoid, that's half the battle. And so trusting in yourself as a leader, and that just by showing up today, I think you're probably way light years ahead of those other leaders you had before. I feel that too. Yeah. Tyler, hi.
Hello. So my question sort of comes in recognizing, yes, that regular feedback that's constructive and supportive is critical for a person to grow. But how do you approach when you've been giving that regular feedback to a person who gets overwhelmed each time, but then there are so many misses continually after, to practice that empathy while continuing to hold them accountable, but not further overwhelming them by just saying, here are all of the things that have happened this week that you've needed improvement on.
Right. So it's, something that it's the repeated behavior, even like that it's documented, right? That's so key. I'm doing a lot of plugs for HR here, but this is where those HR partners can help, because depending upon what organization you're in, where you're at? Does somebody need to be put on a performance improvement plan? Now, people always think that's like the hospice of the end of work, right? So like, that's the one step before you, but that's not the case, right? It's saying, listen, this is what keeps, how can we do this differently? Do you need, like, is the directions that's being provided? Sometimes, obviously, I got certified in elementary and special education years ago, and we learned the 7 different types of learning styles. I don't know if that's changed since it's been a while. But it's the same with staff. What are different learning styles? Like I had a staff member, I was like, what is it? It was just a matter of giving directions differently, and what is working? How would you like to receive direction? Because what we're doing is not working right now, and so throwing out, I'm just giving some options to think about, Tyler, but you may have to just partner with someone else, in HR and saying, what are the next steps that I can take? But also being really upfront with that person and transparent too, and what those next steps are, to being fair. Because there's nothing worse, I think, when people leave or exit a situation. I was never told. I was put in the dark. The last 2 months were horrible because my manager never talked to me, and all I talked to was HR about my performance. And so you want to be along this every step of the way.
It makes me think, Leah, that
Oh, I'm sorry. Ugh.
I think sometimes we think compassionate has to be good feelings, but like I can be compassionate and still tell you bad news, right?
Yes.
Like,
yeah,
I can be compassionate in the way in which I share to you that your performance is really suffering, right? And I think not having to, sometimes I always feel like if I'm compassionate, I have to just be overly kind and understanding. And yes, I'm entering into it with an understanding, lens, but I'm being compassionate by sharing honestly, this is what is happening, right? Like, and this is how your behavior is impacting our end accountability and product, whatever it is, whether it's the services we're providing for students or the classes we're teaching or whatever that is. We know the end goal of what we're trying to work for and towards. So how do I still talk about that? Because sometimes I think being honest is the most compassionate thing that we can do, and not backing away from that, so that you don't get in that situation like you were just mentioning, Leah, where someone goes, well, I never talked to anybody. I didn't know this is what it meant until somebody in HR gives me the final rule, right? Whatever they might, decision. And so for me, I really have to come around to that of recognizing compassion doesn't always mean that I'm just kind and always am that shoulder to be there and cry on and support them. I am that, and there are other pieces to that.
And too, Tyler, like, I think that, we deal sometimes with staff that, the job that they're in, they're just so afraid of saying, I don't like what I'm doing. And so do you know that? Like, is there other projects they could be, or things that are being shifted? They still got to get the work done, right? The work that's being assigned. Otherwise, maybe they need, is that where a career coach someone comes in for them? Because at the, again, assuming good intent, nobody comes to work saying, man, I'm going to really fuck up my job today, and I can't wait to do it. Nobody comes, maybe there is some, but that's again, a whole nother workshop.
You've identified like 3 other workshops just in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, great. But I think we all want to come and do the best job we can. Again, what's in our way? What resources do we need to do the best? And sometimes what's in our way is the job that we just don't want to do, or maybe not a good fit for. And is that garner another conversation too? Yeah.
Leah, did you see the question that Lindsay asked here?
Yes.
As a young faculty member, I'm never managing folks older, more experienced than myself.
Yeah.
On that too.
I think, and I've been in that situation too before. I think from the start is just, here's what I'm coming in with, in terms of expertise and strengths. Here's my expectations, but I would love to hear from you. What strengths are you all bringing to the team? Where do you need help? Where could you best see me as someone that can best support you as a manager. See, as your manager, you emphasize in there, like, let's not forget, or as a leader, where can you grow, or what strengths are you bringing to the team? So it's having that conversation and getting that up front, first and foremost. Yeah, and asking them what they want in a leader, being able to provide that. Yeah. Some really good advice in this chat.
Absolutely. We have a couple other slides. Do you want to share those resources and questions that you had, or how? We have a couple of minutes left.
I know. I just want to share the last 2 slides.
Okay.
Real quick.
I will put that for you.
And so some tips to go away with, right? Listen without interrupting. We always want to jump in and say, yeah, but, right? I do this a lot, right? Listen without interrupting. Learn and pronounce your peers' names correctly. I put that in there because it's so key. And hey, Uncle Google's great at this. When I have an upcoming meeting and I don't know how to pronounce someone's name, there's a great search feature in Google, and you know how to pronounce someone. I just put it in and they pronounce it for you. It's a really cool thing. Giving recognition is feedback too. So don't forget that. Asking for others' opinions. Robert Redford was famous for doing this in meetings. I want to leave this conversation knowing more than I came in with. I want to have my mind changed. That opens space actually for people to contribute opinions in a way that's safe, and they feel like I can just throw anything at the wall, right? Being cognizant of nonverbal communications and body language. Don't multitask during conversations. You're on the computer, or on the phone, or all this kind of stuff. Being present. Close the loop. If you have a conversation with someone and said, I'm going to get back to you on that, get back to them on that. Encouraging others to be supportive, be more flexible and open to changing plans and direction. You may be stuck in saying, we've got to do this next week, right? And taking into account, can we be flexible in how we do that next week in what's with taking in what somebody just told you. Show patience and express yourself calmly. I was not a good model of that this morning, getting my 5-year-old on the bus. And then the pendulum swung such another way. I was crying along with her. So don't do that. Open up about yourself and show vulnerability to the point where you feel comfortable, not to the point of where you're like, giving them everything, but to the point of where you feel comfort and where it's that connection, deep, digging deep down inside. Asking the other person to further explain their position, acknowledge the other person's perspective, ask more questions, be curious, not judgmental. And then the next slide, I always love this. The difference between hate and love is understanding the need. The difference between hate and love is understanding the need. What barriers can I remove? What resources can I provide? Kristen, I think I have just 1 minute left.
You do. You have 1 minute left.
And Catherine has her hand up.
Catherine gets your final minute.
Awesome. Hi. So there's been a very interesting sort of sidebar conversation that I've been having with someone about imposter syndrome, specifically as it relates to this. So it's not just sort of in general professional imposter syndrome that often is faced, that women often face. I'm not saying men don't, but often it comes with women. As a leader, having come from literally abusive leadership, not mine, but somebody else to me in the past, and I'm sort of overcorrecting in some of this. I now sort of have this imposter syndrome as a leader, and so to apply empathy and accountability without letting that pendulum swing too far, and still try to stay within a framework while managing imposter syndrome, trying not to be that jerk that you came from, there's a lot in there. And so, is there a follow-up seminar or something that relates to this, but like builds in the imposter syndrome piece and like how to manage this while also managing imposter syndrome?
Yeah, that's a great follow-up session.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, no,
full week with Leah planned coming up very shortly. But no, I think that's a great.
It is a great one because it's an extension of that. it's bringing in all kinds of identities too into where you are as where you're positioned as a manager and a leader, and what shared experiences you're bringing in. That imposter piece absolutely comes up. Yeah, that's such a good point.
Well, it's a good point to remember too.
Yeah,
that
thank
how
you.
our identity plays into that, and how we're thinking
Yes.
about that, whatever that might be for us.
We
right?
didn't even get into the
And-
power dynamics of these kinds of conversations. That's a whole nother thing.
Yes.
So
Well,
yeah.
what I do want to do is just thank you though, Leah, for your time and your wisdom, and just, creating this space for all of us to come together. I know I took a bunch of notes and thinking too, just as myself as well, about empathy and accountability, and how do we do that and do that well for the people that we care and work with. So thank you. That's always a pleasure. And you can see all of the gratitude from everyone there as well. We will, as always, if there's anything that LeaderShape can be doing to help each of you and partnering with your organizations to continue these kind of conversations, here is our information. We'd love to reach out. And Leah, also thank you for putting your email address. You put it in the chat. So if you have questions, I'm sure people can just reach out to you. Would that be okay?
Absolutely. Happy to.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all, everyone. Have a really great afternoon.
Great to see everybody.
Thanks all.